I'd love to hear what your journey's been like having an autistic son.
It was one of those things where you have your first child, you're like in shell shock because you don't even, it's all of a sudden your life changes.
What's it like having spent literally a lifetime with one of your kids to drop them off at school?
Yeah, I'm not going to go back. No, you're going to go back, but you can come home and feel grounded for a day or two. That's totally cool.
What are the emotions now?
I think the last thing any of us as parents would want to see is your kids struggling, but for whatever reason, they're not able to verbalize that or share it.
I'm curious how you dealt with that.
Like they're probably not going to go, yeah, I just got cut.
This will pay off great in 15 years. I read about grit. Let me just push through that dip. Welcome to Dad Pod. I'm Mike.
And I'm Luke. We're friends here in Madison, and we both have kids. And at least for us, becoming a dad has been transformational. We talk to all sorts of dads in all sorts of situations to learn from their unique challenges, lessons, and evolutions. The goal is simple: learn from each other to become better dads.
If you dig it, please find us on Apple or Spotify and click follow. That single click helps put us in front of more dads, which Luke would really appreciate.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Dad Pod. We're so excited to have Jesse join us today. So we just found out as we were getting ready to record this episode that this last weekend, Jesse actually dropped one of his kids off at college for the first time. And we thought it'd be a great opportunity to just dive into this and what's it like having spent, literally a lifetime with one of your kids to drop them off at school.
Yeah, I did. I dropped my middle son Eli off at Marquette last Wednesday, a week and a half ago-ish. And I would tell you, it's a huge life transition for me. I can tell it's also, he was back this past weekend and got to talk with him. So obviously it's a very big transition for him too. And as much as a 18-year-old is able to, he's, we talked a bit about how he was feeling and how things were going. But yeah, huge moment in life. As you said, Luke, he's been with us for 18 years and all of a sudden he's not, like in an instant. So it's a big deal.
What's the moment where the reality of that sets in? Is it when you're walking away, the drive there?
Mike, I mean, for me, it was, I have to say, it's interesting because I was aware that this moment would come. I can literally remember lying in bed one night a long time ago, a few years ago, and thinking to myself, counting and going, I have about 1,000 days left with my son. That's what I have left, right? And I mean, literally remember laying in bed thinking that. And then all of a sudden it's here. And I think for me, it was more grief in the couple of months this past summer leading up to that moment. I know for some, there were lots of parents at Marquette dropping their kids off at the same time. And there were many tears in that from parents. And it was sad, and that was a really emotional moment when we actually said goodbye. And I actually took a video of him walking away just because I'm kind of a sentimental guy that way. But for me, the leading up to the moment we dropped him off was probably the most difficult parts. And then saying goodbye was it was a surreal moment. You're surrounded by all these kids and parents hugging their kids and saying goodbye. And you're saying goodbye, not by any stretch, right? Like permanently or anything like that. But it was a very surreal moment when we actually dropped him off.
What was the drive there like? Because Marquette is like, how long is the drive for you? Hour and a half or?
Yeah, hour and 15 minutes or something. I mean, as you said, Luke, I'm in Madison, and Mike, it's hour 15. The drive there, I don't know. It was a strange moment. It almost in some ways unlike anything I've ever experienced because it was fine. And we talked about things we would just typically talk about, fantasy football draft coming up and stuff like that. But at the same time, it had this like low level tension that it wasn't sort of conflict like. I think it was just the anticipation of knowing, like, we know this is where we're going and what we're doing. And we had a lot of work to do because we had to carry all of his stuff up to his dorm and all those things. But it was a very strange moment because there was this low level tension, and yet we still had conversations, and it was somewhat like what it's always like.
So when you say goodbye and then he walks away and then he exits your field of view.
Yeah.
What what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're probably going to hear me in this for this topic talk surreal a lot. It's so the actual, we went, dropped off all of his stuff, helped him get his room together. That took a couple of hours, had some lunch with all of those kinds of things. But then it was myself and his brother and sister and my ex-wife, and we were all there, right? And then you're like, okay, and they have it all planned. So at Marquette, it's like at this time you have to do this, and then you have to be at, some get together. There was like a kind of like an opening that officials at the, so we did all of those things. But so you're at this moment and we're all saying goodbye. We're giving him hugs, and his sister, who is a sophomore at Monona Grove High School, Emma, starts crying, like just loses it at that moment. And then he starts crying, and he's not a outwardly emotional kid. And then, and then I gave him a hug, and that's it. It's an emotional moment. And then his mom gave him a hug. And then we had to walk a ways because it's in downtown Milwaukee for listeners who aren't familiar with Marquette University. So we have to walk a ways, like 3 or 4 blocks to get back to the car. And it just so happened he had to walk in the same direction as I was walking, right? So you say goodbye, but then it was him. He was proud. He's like, well, I'll walk with you, Dad, for a little while if you want. I got to go that way anyways. And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And so the rest of my family left and went a different direction because their car was in a different lot. And so we walked together for a block and a half or so. And so there was almost like a second goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not like there was a second goodbye. And then, yeah, like I said, I gave him a hug. I told him I loved him. I told him he was going to be great. He said, thanks, Dad. And told me that, he loved me. And then he turned and walked away. And I'm not a big social media kind of capture pictures. I do some of that, but in that moment, I just thought I'm just going to video him literally walking away. And I did. And it was oddly kind of, I think partially because there's so many people all around. There's parents and kids and there's so much activity. It's like being in downtown New York almost, it feels like, right? Like there's so much stuff going on that then I just have to walk to my car, and I'm a deep thinker type person. And so you're navigating all of these people really, but I don't know. I think to me, it was just like, well, that's it. Like, this is it, And really what hit me the hardest, I would say, is then when I actually got to my car and I closed the door and I just sat there for probably 2 or 3 minutes and just like was in that moment. And it was like, he's gone. Like he's in school now. And that was the hardest, probably the hardest of all moments, was just that sitting in the car, like, well, I'm going to drive away now.
What's hard about it? And I ask because there's obviously a huge amount of this is a celebration of your success as a parent, right? A huge amount of this is we did it.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing in you is like real grief. Like why do you think it shows up in that way?
Yeah, Luke, I mean, that's a great question. I think for me, I'm 51 years old, really. Well, I would say I'll answer it this way. He asked me in this last summer at one point. He said, "Hey, I've heard people say, college is like the greatest years of your life, right?" And he's like, "Was that for you?" And I said, Eli, I said that they were great years. I really liked the college years, but honestly, the greatest years of my life were just raising you and your brother and sister. Like from the time you were, it's all good all the years, but really for me, it was when they could actually walk and start engaging you and doing things. At 2 or so years old up until now. And you have this person in your life, right, where you have a relationship and a love like literally like no other. It's completely different than any other type of relationship and love. And I know all listeners who have kids would identify with that, I'm sure. And intellectually that it's just all changing, right? Like it's all from, you live together day in, day out, and even all the mundane, boring stuff, but also, all the fun stuff like participating in sports and going to school activities and all this stuff. And you're doing all that for 18 years. And for me, at least, I was just intellectually aware that it will never be the same. And I'm not good with goodbyes. I'm just not good with goodbyes. And so it's a type of goodbye that you knew was going to come one day. But, when they're 5, 6 years old, you're like, well, that's a long ways off. But suddenly it's not. It's here and it's now.
So now that you've, kind of been with this now for, what was it, a week and a half?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the emotions now? And I'm also interested in, it sounds like he came back. It sounds like it was a see you on Saturday. But what was that like?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, Luke, when I thought about this, I'm also sort of a think ahead, like strategic in a way kind of guy, thinking about what's that going to be like. And I play scenarios out in my head and like, what will that be? And I think I thought it would be a lot of grief for a while. And oddly for me, that was all like pre him leaving, and it's still sad. And I see pictures of him and stuff here and there, but it's a lot less. I'd say for me, kind of a feeling of content. Like he's on his way, right? Like now he's studying and he's a young man, and he's, I don't know. I think of it maybe as these college years are the transition from being a kid to being an adult, right? Like this is your transition time now. And so that's probably the primary feeling that I have. But you do have moments of kind of sadness, and also moments of just thinking about, I wonder how class is going for him, right? And I wonder if he's making friends, and I wonder what he's doing right now. And of course, through the wonderment of like Life 360, he's still on my circle. And so I can still see that. And, you're looking at that, and you're like, oh, he's at, Subway now, I guess. And, things like that. So
did you get the pepperoni?
Cold cut combo, Dad. Come on.
Yeah. So, and then I had kind of talked with him, and his mom had talked to him too, I know, and prepped him, tried to give him kind of foreshadow what it would likely be like. And I really focused on it's going to be great, and encouraging him and supporting him, and told him I'll be your biggest cheerleader, but also kind of knowing just from my experience when I went to college that those first few weeks, month is like such a huge transition for him. And so I'm trying to prep him for that too. And just talked about, it's going to be super fun, but there's also going to be times where it'll be difficult. And he at first was like, yeah, I don't know. He was sort of indifferent about it. Like, oh, I'll come home whenever, and I'm going to do all these things. And then, halfway through his first week in college, you could tell, like, he was like, yeah, he called me one night, I think on a Thursday or something, last Thursday. And you could tell he was just like, it's a lot harder than I thought. And he said, it was harder to find friends. And so we talked about all the transitions that you just don't think about, but are real. Like, it's a new city. He really didn't have many of his friends from high school go with him. In fact, none of his guy friends. He's got a couple girls that were in his class. All new friends, right? A whole new way of learning academically, all this new stuff that an 18-year-old kid is now faced with. And I had said to him back then, and when he called, I said the same, like, if you feel like you need to come home and just feel grounded, have something familiar in your life because it's all new, that will help you a lot. And you can always come home. Like, you're always welcome anytime you want, but you got to go back. Like, you can't, yeah, I'm not going to go back. No, you're going to go back, but you can come home and feel grounded for a day or two. That's totally cool. And that's kind of what happened.
What would you say are the challenges that you worry about? Like, what are you trying to scenario plan for outside of the successes?
Yeah. I mean, I think, just having gone through the experience and recognizing that his will be it'll be different than mine, but there'll also be similarities. Just really, I think more than anything, he's a great student. He's got really good study habits. So it's like, it's going to be different. There's not going to be anybody there that's like, hey, you didn't turn in your assignment on time. You got to make sure you do it. It's like, well,
no one cares.
Right. Like, you're in college now, kid, figure it out. So talked a little bit about that, but probably more so, I guess, for me, it was really just the emotional side of it, right? For him, like, thinking about, it's going to be a big change. He's a pretty social kid, and his social network here in the Madison area was, he had a lot of friends, and he was close to them. So really kind of helping him prepare for that as best you can. But I think what I kind of knew and what he found is you can think about it and prepare for it. And I think when you're 18, right, you do a lot of, yeah, right. Yeah, I got it, Dad. Yeah, okay, kind of thing. But
Yeah, I was in. I already knew that type of kid.
yeah, I think we all were, right. When you're that age, you kind of, what you know.
You know
and
everything.
Had these experiences. So just trying to help him prepare for those experiences. And then I think what I wanted to accomplish, Mike, than anything was just to help him know, like, oh yeah, when I'm faced with this, I have a safety net, right? I can still come back. It's only an hour and 15. You can come back home. It's okay. Or you can go visit your friends at another college, right? So that it's just familiarity. To me, it was about knowing you have options that are familiar to you to help you feel a little grounded.
It's interesting thinking about this from the parent perspective of not putting your experience onto them and the assumptions, the benefits, the challenges that you associate with your experience, and projecting that for them, or even, it's like, if you mention it, could you make it part of their experience? You couldn't get me to college faster. I was ready to get there. I wasn't that interested in a lot of, I had 50 or so people from my class went there, and I wasn't that interested in maintaining close ties with most of those. And so I went to Madison, big. Yeah. So it's a big community, and I loved it, but not everybody is going to feel comfortable in that massive environment, and so really giving space to the child to have their experience and not be nudging them in a, outside of the broad swaths, but not nudging them towards stuff that, and like trying to make their experience your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think his mom and I had a little bit different experiences. And I think that sort of, that variance for him helped sort of, because we both shared what it was like. And I think she's a little more like, you're going to get through it. It's just go do it, all good. And then me, it was more like, I was a little more, you should just anticipate that it's going to be challenging and you're going to feel like it's totally different. But again, as I said, just know that you have options if you feel that way. And so, as you will, as parents, you kind of share your own life stories and like what happened with you. And also just knowing, I think what you said, Mike, is right. Like, he's going to have his own experience, and we know that. And there probably will be elements of that experience that are similar to what I had and some that aren't, and that's okay. But just knowing you have resources or, options in the event that things get to be difficult, because I think the last thing any of us as parents would want to see is your kid's struggling, but for whatever reason, they're not able to verbalize that or share it. And then they keep struggling and you're like, you're going to be fine, and not really help them. And then, who knows, there's all kinds of really bad things that could happen in those types of scenarios. That's how I thought of it, at least.
When you reflect on the past 18 years or, and particularly in the past, 4 or 5 years, and you think about the preparatory work moving toward this transition period, and it could be college, it could be, there's other ways to go through this transition, but is there stuff that jumps out at you that was especially critical and also especially that emerged as not important or as irrelevant when you look at the big things that you tried to do to prepare your son for this?
Yeah, and it may dovetail into another topic, but for me, I'm a big sports guy. I've been involved in sports my whole life from the time I was a little kid, and Eli was too. And I coached him in all kinds of sports. And I, in a way, from the time he was 6, 7 years old, I've always looked at coaching sports as really just a fun avenue to teach life lessons and things like dealing with adversity and how to, cooperate with other people and how to deal with difficult personalities and all of those kinds of things. So honestly, I thought about each of those opportunities, coaching my son in sports, that is, as really just preparing him for things that will happen in life. I couldn't tell you that I really specifically thought about college and going to college as one of them, but the closer that got, the more, and we even talked about that at times, like, when we would talk about practice, right? And like having to get up and like pushing yourself to try to be better and like do the best you can, even on days when you don't feel like you need to. We talked about that was one of the topics on the way down to college, is like, you're probably going to have days like that. And there's no mom or dad. The professors don't care if you show up or don't show up, right? Like, turn in your work or don't turn in your work. So use those experiences that you've already had and the skills that you've learned through that to push through on those days where you just don't want to do it, right? Or like you just don't feel like you have it in you. So things like that for me, I think throughout his life and throughout our time together, I just saw that as one avenue to just build life skills that would help him in this moment.
What was it, to kind of jump into that topic, what was it like being a coach for your kids throughout their childhood?
Yeah, Luke, for me, I love this. When I think about, my favorite time of life being a dad to my kids, that's true. That's one of the reasons is, it's just, it gives you a way to, again, to teach them things but also be with them and participate with them, and also to see them, because I know different parents are different, but for me growing up, my mom and stepdad came to all my games and everything. And I was in a lot of sports in high school, and I always, at the time, you just think it's more fun. You're just out there with your friends and you're doing your thing, and that's cool. But now as you get older, I really appreciate the fact that they did that. So thanks, George and Chris, for coming to all my sports, listening.
Mailbag at dadpod.fm, please.
So I wanted to do that for them too. I wanted to be there, and because I love sports and I learned a lot from really good coaches, I figure, and it always seems like sports are looking for volunteer coaches to help out. I've never gotten paid a dime for any sport I've ever coached. I love doing it though, because for me, it was like, wow, I can, hockey, for instance, with Eli, he played hockey all since he was 5 years old, and it's a long season. You started like end of September as a youth player, and it goes till March. So it's a really long season, long winters, sometimes here in Wisconsin. I just got to spend night after night with him, doing fun things and teaching him, as I said, things about life, though it looks like you're teaching them about hockey. So it was fantastic. I loved it. And same for my daughter, who is a sophomore. I coached with her. It's just about being together and sharing a life experience at a time where to them it's like fun. They're with their friends and they're learning stuff. But for me, in my 30s and 40s at that time, I don't know, it's just a shared life experience that's just wonderful.
You mentioned earlier the days where you got to get up and do it even when you don't want to do it. How did you teach that lesson in those days where they're like, I don't want to go? I know, and I could see a scenario where I know this doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Like I know this doesn't matter. Why do I have to go to this? I'm curious because it's you go to college or you move out of this school, the high school environment, and it's like a vacuum where all of a sudden there is no one who cares what you do. You could do this, you could not do it, and in my college experience, I saw people who they had no parachute.
Yeah.
They just were going to fly toward the ground, and it was going to be a glorious explosion. And then all their friends move on and they're stuck back there. You know what I mean? And so I'm really curious how the repercussions of this I see it could be quite severe. Yeah. And it's an important lesson. And I'm curious how you dealt with that.
Yeah. Well, and I when they're at home in a home environment, right? It's like, well, we got to get up and go. I think Eli's mom and I both parented really well that way, because it wasn't I don't think it was tyrannical or militaristic or anything like that, but it was always very much like, no, we're going, we need to get going. Right. And when they're 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, you can kind of do that as a parent. Like, no, this is what you're doing, right? Like, there's not a choice in this. And so that's kind of one thread. The sports threat for me from a very early age, I looked at it as like you're building these habits, right? Like they're habits, and they'll help you as an athlete because, if you want to give it your best, if you give them an option of like give it the best you can or don't, doesn't matter to me as a coach. Kids aren't always very motivated to want to, because it's hard, right? Like you're talking about things like, having to skate drills that aren't really all that fun, because when kids are 6, 7, I don't know how many listeners are, hockey people, but if you're not, nobody wants to skate around cones and like go back and forth as hard as you can. What they want to do is get the puck and shoot it into the goal. And that's what they want to do, right? Like they don't want to do all these other things. But we know, right, as adults, like, yeah, but in order to be the best hockey player, there's lots of skills involved. And most of the game, you're not shooting the puck at the net, right? You're doing all this other stuff. And so, for me, I guess I was mindful of that, and him and his teammates, but I always, pushed towards like, I would set in the beginning of the year, like my expectations are that when you're on the ice, you're giving the very best that you have, doing the very best that you can. And for me, Mike, it was important to build hockey skills, but more importantly for my son and for his teammates, but especially for my son, but you're learning these habits, right? Like what it's like I'm faced with something that I have to do. I don't really want to do this. But I wanted him to build the habit of like, but I'm going to kind of fight through that and do the very best that I can. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. But the point is, I'm doing the very best that I can in this moment. And, now you take that to college, to your point, and it's like, I don't want to study for this quiz that I have tomorrow. I just don't want to do that, right? There's like 10 other things that I'd rather do right now, but just knowing like, but I have to, and I'm going to fight through it and push. And I'm hoping that, those are habits that he's built that will help him now in college and for the rest of his life, really.
Would you be, when you were in the moment, and he was like, Dad, I'm tired, I want to sleep, I'm interested in the monologue in your head. Did your monologue have these thoughts and connecting these dots, or was it just like, fuck you, get out of bed? the second part of the second part of the question is, how transparent were you with him of this is part of a bigger lesson, or were you just focused in that moment itself?
Yeah. I think, Luke, I like to believe I'm also a fairly contextual person, and I like to believe for me, it kind of depended on the situation, right? Like if he was sick, say for instance, and, coughing and had a sore throat. Okay. I knew enough to let off the gas and be like, hey, it's cool. Like, this isn't that big of a deal. You're sick. Let your body, things like that. I like to believe I was mindful of those circumstances that's a little bigger than whatever it is that we're doing, right? If it's, we're going to go to your sister's dance recital and you're sick, that might be one thing, but more like, I know you don't want to do this. You're going to do this, right? She comes to all your stuff. So you're going to go to this thing. And so I think I tried to be mindful of the circumstances and the context, and I would think about that. Like, yeah, this is probably one of those situations where this might not be the moment to really push hard on that. But then, other situations or circumstances, you might be like, no, it'll be good for him, right? Like, because I guess that's one of the things that I thought about, Luke. It was like you're building these habits that will help you in life, and so he's not a robot either. Like there are times where it's just going to be, and you have to be able to give a little grace when it seems like it makes sense, but other times, kind of pushing. And I grew up in an era too, at 51 years old, in the 80s, right, where it was very different. Like coaching was still very like, get your ass up, and like it didn't really matter, right? Like my arm fell off, and they're like, who cares? You have another arm. Get out there, Like that's so you have that influence right in you a little bit.
One of the questions that I think about is that question of when to push, and because part of it is helping deliver the experience of the success and of the perseverance. And not every child is going to naturally have that, but it could be developed. I have a 2-year-old, so like, how do I identify those spots? Where do I pick my shots as the parent to push? I was in sports also, and was I had the experience of being really good in some situations and then being bad and like getting cut from teams and
Yeah.
that base and for me it was like getting that wide range of both sides of it was ultimately helpful, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, similarly, Mike, I mean, I had similar experiences where we had, I had a lot of success in sports, but then also some of those situations where like, wow, I didn't make this team or whatever. And my daughter, who is a sophomore, she's not involved in as much of that. She was when she was younger, but she's had those experiences too of getting cut just recently. She tried out for the dance team, for the Monona Grove dance team, and didn't make it, right? Got cut. And for me, I guess I see all of those as positive learning experiences, even though in the moment it's like
Brutal.
not great, right? Yeah, not fun. And I didn't think of it that way either, right? When I was a kid. And I do think, for me, I guess as a dad, I'm aware like they probably aren't thinking about it that way in that moment, right? Like they're probably not going to go, yeah, I just got cut. Yeah, no, actually this is a good,
This will pay off great in 15
yeah,
years.
I read about grit.
yeah, let's learn.
Let me just push through that dip.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not under any illusions that the kids think of it like that, right? But I think for me, it's more about again building the habit of giving them the
Right.
thinking about it that way. But where to look for it, Mike, to your question, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. It's just, when my kids were 2, I can't really think of this. It's been a while, but I can't think of specific instances. But I think, anytime when, Sally is wanting to play with a friend, and I mean, we had these experiences
Yeah.
too when they were really little, and the other friend, oh, I'm playing with somebody else, that would happen, right? And then it's like, oh, she doesn't like me anymore, and we're not friends anymore, and she hates me, and stuff like that. And you're like, well, she just is playing with somebody else. Like right now, there are already plans. It's okay, like that's fine. But to them, it's like it's a giant rejection thing.
Totally.
And so, I guess even those moments for me, and as I think of parenting, you try to be empathetic and understanding and like, yeah, that's really difficult, honey. I'm really sorry that happened. She probably just has another friend, though. It probably isn't that she doesn't like you anymore and she'll never talk
Right.
to you ever again, but I mean, in the mind of a 2-year-old, like they don't think of it like that. But I also feel like the familiarity of, that was just a style of parenting for me. It was like, I just thought of it at those are the types of skills that I want them to have when they become adults and feel like they're important because rejection's all over the place and, adversity's all over the place. And so how do you help them build those skills so that they're prepared for those moments when adversity hits? I mean, I think if you stop and look at it as a parent, there's just opportunities all over the place when they're really little that to them, it's a big deal, right? Like, oh my God, I didn't get invited to, Deanne's birthday party. The world's going to end now, right? Because I wasn't invited, but all my friends were invited. I mean, those things happen all the time for little kids. And to them, it's the end of the world almost, right? And it's like, it's going to happen. Those things are going to happen to you all your life.
One specific question I know I have a 6-year-old and we're not dealing with it right now, but I see it coming, which is the when to stick with a sport versus when is it okay to, hang up the proverbial skates and move on to the next sport. And I'm wondering if you dealt with any of those, on the evolutionary tree of youth sports. It's some of these are dead ends for these kids.
Yeah.
How do you know when it's gone far enough? I don't know if you've dealt with any of those situations.
Yeah, Luke, we have had a few through the years. And the first thing is more of a commentary on how things have changed. I feel like when I was a kid, my parents were like, if you're going to sign up for this, like you're committed to it and you're going to do it. You may not like it, but if it's a 4-month thing, like you're doing it. You can't quit on your team, right? Those people are relying on you. Those kinds of things are kind of how my parents parented me. And what I've seen, I guess, through coaching and stuff is that, it's different now. It seems like for some like that, like if you signed up for it, you're halfway through, maybe you're not on the first line or you're not like the starter or something. I like, forget it. I'm going to quit. Right. And my personal opinion is I'm not so sure. I mean, each individual situation is probably, there's reasons, but for me, I'm not sure that with my philosophy, right, of helping build life lessons and things, I'm not entirely sure that's a good thing. But I've seen
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
so
That's
I guess
tough.
that's how I approached and would continue to that situation. And we would say to our kids, like, that's cool. You can sign up for this. And we never really, what we always did was said, you don't have to play hockey, for instance, but you have to do something. You can't just sit around all day. Like you need to be involved in something. And that's kind of how we approached that. But we had situations where my daughter Emma, for instance, was in volleyball and in softball. And, she didn't like the team or wasn't having as much fun anymore. And we had that same approach. Like, you have
You
6
got to
weeks
see it
left.
through.
Like, you need to go to practice and you need to do the best you can while you're there. But then when that's over, if you don't want to sign up next year, that's okay. But you'll have to do
Yeah.
something. That's how we looked at that.
Yeah, that's where we're trending. I absolutely had the same approach applied to me, which is once you've signed on the dotted line, that's kind of like your word, and integrity was always a huge thing in my family. So there was once you're in, you're in. But
Yeah.
I've always been interested in that, like, okay, when the season's done, how do you have that conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that was it for me. Is it was okay. It's over. You can decide next year. And we had
right.
a variety. We had moments where um, Emma, this happened with, she was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And you're like, okay. But then, time goes on,
Right.
whatever. And then as her friends start to talk about, oh yeah, softball's going to be great. It's going to be so much fun. And you're going to play. And then all of a sudden, there's sort of quasi peer pressure. And it's like, yeah,
Right.
I want to do this now again. And you're like, okay, that's totally cool. But other times she was like, no, I'm done. I'm good with that. And you're like, all right, what are you going to do then? What are you going to be involved
Right.
in?
It's cool. To shift subjects a little bit, you've talked about you have 3 kids. We spent some time talking about 2 of your kids. You also have an autistic son,
Yep. Aaron.
and
Yep.
yeah, and I'd love to hear what your journey's been like having an autistic son.
Yeah. Yeah. So Aaron is our oldest. He's 20. He was born in Milwaukee, and then we moved to Madison, I think, within a year. And he was diagnosed with autism and a few other things around 18 months old. But it was one of those things where, how you have your first child, right? And everything you're like in shell shock because you don't even, it's all of a sudden your life changes instantly. And there's all this stuff going on. But you go to the doctor, right? And they do these milestone checks. And it's like they should be able to raise their head at some age and they should be able to do this and do that. And he was just increasingly missing those milestones. But we didn't, so we kind of knew. And the doctors early on were like, that might be okay. We'll just see where it goes. But then little by little, he wasn't catching up. He was getting further behind. And so at 18 months, he was diagnosed with autism. And that was, life altering, obviously. At the time, going back that far, we didn't exactly know what that meant. And they didn't either because our doctors were saying, yeah, we'll just have to see what happens. Like, he might catch up and he might be fine. And some kids can even sort of like be diagnosed now, but then progress enough that then they really don't have that diagnosis. So it's kind of confusing and it's unclear. But as he got older and as, the years went by, 2, 3, 4, 5, it became increasingly clear that, he wasn't likely going to catch up. He's nonverbal, but he had language is kind of a strange thing, but it happens sometimes with autistic kids. He had language, started to emerge. I don't remember what age, but maybe like 4 or 5. It was a little later, and he started to have words and talk. But then it went away, and he's been nonverbal ever since. He doesn't have words. He verbalizes, but he doesn't have language like we would, word skills and stuff. So that's presented some real unique parenting situations, right? Because he literally for 15 years or something, he can't say I have a headache, or he can't say I want this or that, but he gestures and you have to, what I've learned and what his mom has learned too is it's just a different relationship. Obviously it's similarly a very loving parent-child relationship in those respects. It's just like like with my other kids too. I love them dearly, but also with a kid with autism, it tends to be more one-sided. It's more, I guess I would say it seems like it can be at times more about his needs and wants in that moment, irrespective of what other people might want or need, no matter what the environment or the situation is. So, that's different. And I think for me as a dad, it really, Aaron has taught me so many things about life. I'll talk about a few of those here in a second, but one thing is you just have to be more patient and more understanding. And I think I'm probably better now. I feel like I was always pretty good, but better at stepping back and looking at the situation and trying to just see, right now he might be he might be dysregulated. And so, now his behavior is not what we would think of as acceptable with kids, right? But like he can't help himself because he's not a violent kid. He's not a kid who will run away. Many parents with kids with autism have those types of things in their lives. And we are fortunate in that we don't really have those. But when Aaron gets dysregulated, if he gets too dysregulated and what we believe is because he can't really verbalize and say like, this is really frustrating or it could be some stimulus, right? The music's too loud in the room or whatever. You can't say those things. You have to kind of guess a lot at what's going on. And you have to I feel like I'm better at being aware of the environment and the surroundings and things that with my other kids, I just never had to worry about, I think that's part of it. I think on the really wonderful side in a different kind of way, which I never really anticipated. So he also has dyspraxia and apraxia, which is a motor planning disorder, which means if you take something like brushing your teeth in the morning, if you just step back for a minute and think about all of the steps that are actually involved in brushing your teeth, right? Pick up the toothbrush, grab the toothpaste, unscrew the cap, squirt a little bit on the thing, put the cap back on, turn the water on, put it on, like all of those individual steps we all just do and like nobody thinks anything of it, right? But for him, he can't motor plan like that. So what you can see in him, he knows what he should do or what you want him to do, but he has to work really hard to think about each of those steps and put them in order, and they frequently get out of order. And so you can see it real time. And one of the wonderful things in that is like you have to be really patient, and it's taught me to be more patient even than I've ever been, and work with him just like you would your other kids on normally developing kids, I'll call it, on just other things like, hey, don't cross the street when there's cars coming, hold your hand, right? Like look both ways, and kids just do that. Well, you're doing the same thing. It's just for actions and activities that we just take for granted. And so it's kind of given me a little bit different appreciation, I feel like that way, Luke. And also like when he really focuses and he can do, just a week or so ago, I was like, I took the time to slow down and be like, let's work on this together. Like, let's just brush your teeth. And it took us legit 5 minutes to go from here's a toothbrush to now you're brushing your teeth, right? But so rewarding to see when he's able to do some of those steps a little bit, which is, I never would have guessed that would be one of the kind of hidden gems or hidden benefits of having a child with autism, because it's an appreciation for these very little things that all of us just take for granted every day. And like, who's going to get excited about brushing your teeth, right? Come on, like nobody's going to really do that. But when you see those things happen, it's like, that's what he's capable of, right? And you can kind of see, I guess what it really is, Luke, is you can see in that moment, like it's in there and he's capable of it, but you can literally see this dyspraxia in the moment actually happening. And you can see him working hard, even though he doesn't verbalize, but you can just see it in his face and his body language that he's working really hard and he's thinking really hard about what to do next. And then he does it, right? And it's like, those are little emotional moments where you're like, that's so awesome, buddy, right? Like, that's so cool. Things like that.
Yeah. How have you thought about, you said something in that discussion around there are times when it feels like a lot has to be about him.
Yep.
You're got to be super aware of your environment, super aware of the things that could be impacting him. He's not going to be able to tell you directly. How did that impact, or how did you approach that as a father with your oldest son who's autistic and then your two other kids?
Yeah.
What was that? How did you balance those things of being super attentive to his needs and also being present and caring for your other two?
Yeah. I mean, I think his mom and I both, I guess the first thing that comes to mind with that, this is such a great question, is partially, again, it's like trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other kids right at that, in moments like that, and try your best to sort of imagine what it is they're thinking as best you can and like how they might see it. And I try to do that. I think what jumps out to me is kids, and we would talk about it like this way with our three kids, like we want to treat you all equally, but hear me out on this. But equal doesn't mean like you all get exactly the same things, whether you're talking about time and attention or, ice cream, although we always would just get a single scoop in a dish. All the kids, they always get the same. I think what it allowed, and it's kind of, I guess it's sort of in a way weaving in some of the skills that I believed in and trying to teach my kids at the same time. I guess I thought of it, right, as there are other lessons here that you can learn. And one of them is, treating you each, and maybe I misused the word when I said equal. That might not be the best choice. It might be treating you both fairly and caring about you equally, caring about you all equally. But that doesn't mean that you're always treated exactly the same, right? And I actually think for those listeners who are coaches and leaders, besides being parents, I took that to the business world too, right? Like, is like people need what they need, and everybody has different needs. And we looked at it as our kids, they have the core needs of being loved and cared about and accepted as they are and things like that. And I do think that's a wonderful thing that's happening in our world right now today, just on a cultural level, is it's in many cases, there's more diversity and inclusion and things like that that are happening. And I think as kids with Aaron, sometimes his needs would really just dominate the moment.
Right.
And we were mindful that our kids might see that as like, well, you care about him more than you care about me, right? Or like, he always gets what he wants, but I don't always get what I want. And, we tried as parents to help them see, like, sometimes that's just what happens. It doesn't mean that we love you less or we care about you less. It's just that his need, this is what he needs, right? And you may not need that right now. And it probably did. And we would say that to them. It probably felt unfair sometimes because
I think that this question, I love your answer, and I love one of your consistent framings of how can I use this as a lesson, to teach. I really struggle with this concept of fairness, and it does feel to me, this total armchair quarterback, it does feel to me that this concept of fairness is a childish concept. Yeah. As an adult, you come to realize that life is not fair, and if you're seeking fairness, you're going to be really upset and probably victimized for much of what you got going on. And it does feel like this is a great way to help. I love what you said. You all have the same amount of love. We're taking care of your needs, but it's not going to express itself in the same way. And that might not feel fair.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we tried to verbalize that to the kids. And again, being mindful, right? Like, a 5-year-old doesn't give a shit about what you're saying.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't care. Like, it's not fair. But
two scoops, one scoop, Dad. I can do the math.
You get the chocolate dip cone. Like Rocky Road, who nobody likes.
Right.
But I mean, I think we tried to verbalize that too, knowing like, time one, the kid just doesn't hear you. Time two, but after 1,000 times of hearing the same thing, and as they get older and their brain, matures and all of that, you just hope like they get it. By the time they get back to Eli going to college, and now he's out of the nest, and mom and dad aren't there every day all the time. You just hope that sunk in over years and years of hearing kind of the same thing in those moments. And like all parents, right? you fail to do that, and times of frustration and all at your kind of worst moments as parents, like you forget all about all that stuff and
For
doing it.
sure.
But I think trying to keep that as consistent, at least for me, trying to be as consistent as I could when I recognized like they probably feel like this isn't fair. Like, why does Aaron get this and I don't? To try to take the time to just, it's so hard to do. And so, I know that as as a dad with three little kids, right? My kids are 20 to 15. So 5 years apart between the three of
Right.
them. I get it. But, trying to take a moment to verbalize that to them and express that because I think what you said, Luke, is kind of what, I don't know, somebody who knows more about neurology than I do probably could explain this, but little brains don't think about stuff like that, right? They just think very much
Right.
like, I want this and I'm not getting it, but he is, and that's not fair. And just trying to help them see like it doesn't really have anything to do with that. And it certainly doesn't have anything to do with love and we love him more than you, but kids do that, right? That's how they equate things. It's hard.
What has the experience of raising your now 20-year-old child done for you in terms of how you've parent? And some of this is, I heard you mention a little bit, really taught you some key lessons. But if you look at your own evolution, how has the experience of having to be his father really changed you? Maybe not just as a father, but as a person,
Yeah.
you know, if you were to ask that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, a few things that we touched on. One is having to be more patient, right? Having
Hmm.
to just, we're all, especially these days, right? It's such a busy world and it always feels like you don't have enough time to do anything. There's a million things to do and not enough time to do it. But reality is, right? Like we all have the same amount of time. It's 24 hours in a day, right? That's what you
Right.
have. And so just being a little more patient, I think, is one thing that just that's just what one of the things that Aaron, I feel like,
Yeah.
has changed me. One of them, just coincidentally, I happened to also years ago, as a quick aside, and I'll get back to this. I was a co-owner in Monkey Business Institute, so there's a little plug for improv comedy, Madison's favorite here in Madison. And I took some improv classes and stuff too,
Oh,
and
wow.
was as part of the troupe for a brief time and wrote a show and all that stuff. So you have to improvise, right? And improvising, what's involved in good improvising, among other things, is you have to be a really good listener and you have to be open. And I think that's something also that Aaron has helped me with is listener, not in the words, right? I mean, whatever the number is, I'll get it wrong, but instead, right? Like up to 90% of communication is nonverbal. Well, he's
Right.
nonverbal. So he doesn't even have that 10% or
Right.
whatever it actually is. But you still have to listen, right? You're listening for all the other nonverbal stuff, as strange as that might sound. I think he's helped me be better at that. Awareness, kind of, situational awareness or contextual awareness. Because, if we're gonna have to go, say, to Summerfest and you're gonna go in an environment like that, that that's gonna be a loud, kind of
Right.
crazy, chaotic environment. We all know that, but like for him, that really affects him. So, things that are less, or sorry, more subtle than Summerfest environments, but that still might be presenting
Mhm.
situations or like stimuli that are actually going to be difficult for him, being aware of that stuff. And just, I would say, just generally, I think generally just emotional intelligence, like he's just helped
Right.
me be generally more emotionally intelligent because can't just jump to conclusions like, hey, he's freaking out about something. Like, don't freak out. Like that's kind of what you want to be able to say, right? And then they'll go, oh, sorry about that. My bad. Like it doesn't work like that, right? Like
Yeah.
it does, and
Right.
he can't even, in many cases, just stop doing things, right? So I guess in that sense too, Luke, maybe a final point is like creativity, right? Like as a parent,
Mm,
maybe that's a word that you don't really associate a lot with parenting,
I
but
love that.
you just have to be more creative in many ways, in vacations that you take, in shopping,
Mm,
things like that. You have to just be more creative around, if I take my other kids shopping, for instance, whatever, I got a list or not, and I'm going to go in and I buy stuff and wow, look at those donuts. I probably shouldn't have them, but I mean, you do all that stuff, right? With Aaron, you have to be more like, okay, I'm going to go in there. I need to get these things, but we can't be hanging around the store and taking our time because that's a pretty
Right.
stimulation rich environment that will help, he'll kind of escalate. And so you have to plan around that and, things like that.
So then obviously the other part of this is I've heard you talk about your kids, their mom, and I'm I'm fascinated and interested in how having an autistic son has impacted, your marriage
Yeah.
up to this point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had mentioned earlier my ex-wife. We divorced last year, and again, Aaron was. We were married 27 years and together 30. So it's a very long time, and I think for that time in life, it was a really good relationship. And I think kids in general, and then I'll get to the question around autism. But for me, my life really just revolved around my children, right? And as time went on, and especially as they got to more of that active age where they're involved in a lot of activities, and I know most listeners would probably identify with this if you have kids in that age, you guys too. You're just running around from one activity
Yeah.
to another. And I loved it, right? There's zero complaints by me. And it would be, I'm going to work and we would plan, like tonight you got to, run Emma over to school at 5. And then by 5:30, you got to get back quick because you got to take Eli to this thing. And all of us know that life, right? And you're just like going around before you know it, it's 10 o'clock and you're like, man, what a busy day. I'm
Right.
exhausted. And that was my life, right? And I was happy with that, and that was part of my identity. And I've thought some about this marriage. To me, if you think about that for a second, right, it's a relationship between two people, and I think it just became, they all kind of just became integrated so much that I never sat around and thought about it like this, guys. But like my life, when I said family or when I said marriage, I just thought about the whole family and the whole dynamic about that and loved it. But I think along the way, and then in addition, you're parenting a special needs child, it's a really difficult thing. And I don't know the statistics. I did not look them up, but I know that, those can create stressors on a marriage, right? And on relationships. And, I would guess, without doing my own research ahead of time here, that divorce and things like that are probably higher for people who are parenting autistic kids or kids with special needs, because it does it, as wonderful as Aaron is, and as much as I love him and have loved being his dad and will continue to, it creates stresses on your marriage that can be hidden sometimes, right? And I think as the kids got older and older and older, and for in Aaron's case, he's going to need somebody to care for him his entire life. That's pretty
Right.
clear. And so, that, and I'm prepared for that, and I'm happy to do it. Like that's my walk. That's part of my life. And I'm not a guy to think much about what was me or like, gosh, this sucks or anything. I mean, like that's my life, right? This is kind of,
Yeah.
I like the saying, right? Like you play the hand you're dealt. I mean, that's what you play. But I think, I just think we kind of lost sight. I don't think anybody's fault. So, kind of a public service announcement for all parents, whether they have special needs kids or not, right? Like you also do have to take time to kind of nurture your individual relationship. But I do think that having a special needs child adds more to it, another dimension that maybe you don't have if you don't have a special needs child. And so it does, it creates stress. And I'd be hesitant to say like that's a cause of divorce or anything like that. I think there's multiple factors that, and some that have nothing to do with kids, right? And stuff like that. And every relationship's different. But to me, I think it's just, it's easy in the days of parenting. And again, particularly with a special needs child to just kind of lose sight of that individual relationship and nurturing and growing that relationship. For me, it really
Yeah.
feels like it just became integrated with the rest of my life. And so I wasn't about feeding and nurturing, that individual relationship.
Well, I do just want to say, you talking about willing to even engage in this question. I think this is a tough one, and I'm sure it was painful to go through the experience yourself. And I think this is one of the big points of why we even do this podcast is just to help people understand that we all have these stories and we all share these experiences, and that's where we can learn. So I just really want to say thank you for being willing to talk about it. I think my next question is, so what has that meant for your life going forward? You
Yeah.
know, how do you think about, you still have in high school, you got a kid who's just off in college, and your oldest is going to have a lifetime of care. So how have you started to think about where you go from here?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say, on the heels of that, and I appreciate you saying that, Luke, and it is difficult. It's interesting. There's a life transition altogether here between getting divorced and sending a kid off to school and having, our son Aaron. There's no more friction, in my opinion, there than it is with any people trying to parent kids, whether they're
Yeah.
married or not. We get along really well. Obviously, the nature of our relationship has changed dramatically, but I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for her, and I think that we're working together really, really well to continue to parent. And when we leading up to getting divorced, we talked about really, really wanting to prioritize our kids and making sure that they didn't feel
Right.
it's inevitable. There's going to be some negative effects of that for them, but that we tried to minimize that as much as possible. Let them know our family still exists, and that's how we talked about it with them. 5-person family is still here. It's just going to look different, right? And I think to this point, a year plus later, we've done that. I feel like so far, and we'll continue to, and I'm confident in that. So I'm grateful for that. So that's the first thing that I would say. I think looking forward, I think that's the best we can do, right? Is we're still parents. So you have a kind of multifaceted, well, actually, they're just different relationships, right? I have individual relationships with each of my kids and with my ex-wife, and like those influence each other. And that's kind of how it just ends up getting intertwined. But I think, going forward, I think we have agreed that is one thing we're going to have to always plan is, where you're living, right? Because we share time with Aaron and care for him. And I think we're
Right.
both committed to, you never know what the future may hold, but we're both committed to continuing it like that. And that kind of means you have to be sort of close to each other physically, living
Right.
in the same general area. So I think that's one of the things, right? That I guess from your last question too, it's sort of part of life having a special needs child. If we didn't have a special needs child, that wouldn't be a necessity,
Right.
right? But it is.
Right.
So that'll be like that going forward. But then, things like Christmases, and we went on spring break every year with the kids. Now the spring breaks are different, so that all goes away at some point in everybody's life, and I know that, but those things are changing. But again, still prioritizing the kids, I guess,
Yeah.
going forward. And remind me, I've forgotten what the point of your question was. I told you I would ramble.
Oh no, you're totally answering the question. The question is kind of, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
And what I was feeling as I was listening to you was this very, I'd say like a very beautiful union of how do you balance what you need and what your ex-wife needs as individuals, right? Like
Right.
you all arrived at this conclusion, while at the same time really continuing to honor and take the responsibility as a parent. And I've never heard of any sort of level of kind of ongoing connectivity and co-parenting and collaboration like this. And it really struck me as beautiful, and like this kind of a deep expression of love is what I kind of took
Yeah.
from that.
Well, and I mean, I guess I just thought of it as, I'm not always, not always, I don't think I'm crazy. I've never invented anything like a mad scientist invention or anything weird like that. But I've never also been somebody who, I've always been a critical thinker, I guess I think of it that way.
Right.
I've never been one to look at things and just go, well, this is what everybody's doing. This is kind of the direction everything's going in. So I've always been one to look at things and go, gosh, that doesn't make sense to me, right?
Right.
Like, I don't understand this. So when we had the difficult conversations around getting divorced, and then since then, from the beginning, I looked at it as, why does it have to be, I know this isn't a podcast about divorce, but why does it have to be that we get divorced and then we're never going to talk to each other, and
Right.
we're going to kind of stay away from each other, and kids are not, and like not have any relationship? Like, why? To me, and I had learned a lot leading up to trying to work on myself, candidly, well prior to the divorce of like understanding myself and why I am the way that I am and why I think that. And I learned things about, I'd known about like love languages, for example, but kind of refreshed my memory around that. And then, but what I did learn about is all the great research that Gottmans have been doing
Oh,
around
yeah.
attachment, right? And so that was like very helpful for me to understand both myself, but also my relationships generally.
Right.
And it just gives you a frame of reference and one, one way to kind of look at that. And that was super helpful. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, the institution of marriage is so important. I'm Christian. I believe in it. But why does it have to be that we're married? And so we have to be, we're like all the things marriage is,
Right.
whatever that means to you. Why does it have to be if we get divorced, then again, it has to be, well, we're not going to interact.
Right.
Why can't it just be a change in relationship, like status from a romantic relationship, right, to a platonic relationship that has history? But
Right.
why does it have to be bad? Why can't it be just a really good platonic relationship? And we all know probably people who have gotten divorced, and we've heard, or at least heard, and like somehow the exes now are like super good friends. And I would talk about, why can't it be that? Why not? Of course, both parties need to want that and want it to be that
Right.
way. I guess I've thought about it from the beginning as obviously I have great respect and love and care for my ex-wife. It's just different. And we're going to be parenting forever, and all of us who are listening, who are parents, are going to be doing that. But we just have the added sort of responsibility of parenting a special needs child. So we have to be closer in our parenting than maybe, we would have otherwise. So if we have to do that, and we're going to have to be in each other's lives, and there's nothing that's happened that's made it caused,
Right.
like, oh my gosh, then why not just get along and like
Yeah.
be close and be friends? But it's just a different relationship, right? It's a different relationship.
I love the kind of kind of putting aside what is expected and just kind of asking, well, what do we want? And
Yeah.
what does the situation call for? The way we love to end these episodes is to ask, imagine, you're talking to somebody who's about to be a father or just became a father. What would be your one piece of advice to that person?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know it happened to me, and I've told other people who are in that very situation, like they're about to have kids. The first thing I would say is like, you're going to get, if you're in a situation, if you're listening to this and you're in a situation where you're pregnant together and you're about to have a child, you're going to get all kinds of advice from people that are going to tell you all kinds of really good things that are going to be super important. And once you have your kid, you're not going to remember any of them, right? You're just going to be like, I remember people talking about this, but I don't remember what they said, because it just isn't, to me, at least my experience was,
Totally.
it wasn't relevant to me until I actually had kids, right? And then you're like, holy crap, they're talking about this kid's crying all night and I can't figure it out. And I know people told me, do this and do that, but I can't remember.
Sway, shush,
Yeah. I get 2 hours of sleep, right?
swaddle.
Yeah. So just maybe, I did not do this, but maybe jot some of those things down. Obviously nowadays we have the internet. That's wonderful. And ChatGPT and stuff. You're going to get tons of great advice, but also I think your life will change forever. And, particularly in those early years, especially if you're a first time parent, it can seem like it's, like bomb shelter mentality, like, oh my gosh, just hunker down and just hope for the best. But those moments are so actually short, even though they don't feel like it, and enjoy it, because, before you know it, you have moments like this where your kid's going off to college and now it all changes again.
Right.
But it is legit, like, arguably the very best thing that's ever happened in my life. And I think probably true for many, many parents out there too.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you so much. We appreciate you for spending the time, for sharing your story. Thank you so much. And for everybody out there, good luck.
Yeah. Mike, Luke, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Before you bounce, I have a quick favor. Please subscribe to the pod. Not only does Luke love juicing those numbers, but it really does help put this thing in front of more dads.
And Mike, on the other hand, just loves juicing. We also now run a listener community on WhatsApp. To join, visit dadpod.fm and you'll see the delicious link at the top of the homepage.
Come on in, baby. We'd love to have you.